I'm here with the strongest Centipede build in the game. If you want to hit Torment 4 and you want to melt bosses and you want to clear high levels of the pit, this is the build for you. I am currently still in the process of building it. I'm already up to 17 billion damage. That wasn't even an overpower hit. The numbers just keep going up. Before we hop into the build, check out this run of tier 90 in the pits. It was absolute breeze. We just flew right through it. We have so much left in this build. plenty of time left. That's the run. Let's hop into the skills and I'll show you exactly how to set this up. We're going to do 2 points so that we can unlock our next section. We're going to go 1 point into Vigorous so we can unlock Balanced Exertion. Your core skills cost 9% increased vigor, but you're going to deal 15% increase more damage. And that actually doesn't really matter too much because our core skills are going to cost 0 vigor, and we'll get to that when we get to the gear section. We're going to do 3 points into Follow Through. Your basic skills deal 6% increased damage, double to 12% on the third cast. Now, we're going to be using a core skill, a basic skill, and a potency skill, and it's only going to be one ability. So it's going to be a pretty crazy build. If you watch the run, every single time that I flew up into the air and I landed again, that was Soar. What that's doing is that when you fly up into the air, when you hit an enemy, you're going to make them vulnerable. The next hit against an enemy struck by Soar is a guaranteed critical. So when you teleport into a group of enemies, you are guaranteed to crit against them. When you land, it's also going to create a cloud that's going to continue making enemies vulnerable for the next 4 seconds. So if we're pulling monsters into that cloud, those are going to become vulnerable also. We're going to do 1 point into Focal Point so that we can unlock Apex. You're going to deal 9% increased vulnerable damage. You're going to double that against Elite. The way that Ravager works is that you're going to have 2 different sections for this. You're going to have a passive. Passive, we're going to gain minimum of ferocity is increased by 2. That means that we're guaranteed to have at least 2 stacks of ferocity. Ferocity increases our attack speed. When we actually cast the ability, unleash a Savage Roar, causing each of your attacks to trigger an additional damage strike per enemy for 6 seconds. The most important part of this ability is when it's active. Your core skills are going to instantly dash to your target, and all of your vigor generation is increased by 30%. If you watched during that run and you saw when I was moving from pack to pack, I was teleporting around, that is because Ravager was up. We're going to be going 1 point into Endurance so that we can go 3 points into Preservance. You're going to gain 1.5% increased damage reduction per stack of Resolve. Resolve increases your damage reduction by 20% while active. Taking damage consumes a stack. You can hold up to 8 stacks. Now you can actually increase those stacks, but we'll talk about that later on. We're going to go into Armored Hide, all the way down through Reinforced Armored Hide. The way that the defensive abilities work, just like Ravager, you're going to have a passive, which this passive, you're going to gain 1 stack of Resolve every 5 seconds. When you activate it, you're going to become unstoppable. You're going to gain 100% increased block chance. That doesn't mean that you block all incoming damage. Block just gives you additional damage reduction. What this is going to be used for, though, that when you activate it, it's going to grant maximum stacks of Resolve. That is incredibly important. We can go from 0 all the way up to maximum, whatever we have, because we're increasing that number. It's a huge source of damage reduction for us. While active, Armored Hide increases your block reduction damage by up to 20%, so you get an additional 20% increased damage reduction here. We're going to be going into Counterattack and all the way down through Reinforced Counterattack. Counterattack, your passive, you're going to gain 10% dodge chance, and then every time you dodge, you're going to retaliate and attack back. That's an automatic cast. So every single time that we activate this, any direct damage that is going to come to us, we are going to dodge for up to 6 seconds. You can still die to AoE explosions and stuff like that, but anybody that is just trying to hit you, you will dodge those attacks. Counterattack also passively increases your critical strike damage by 6% for up to 30% for every close enemy. We're going to be taking Scourge, and we're going to go all the way down through Reinforced Scourge. This is a fun ability. Whenever you cast this, you're going to fear enemies and you're going to slow them. But we have an ability to pull everything back in, so even though things are running away, you'll still be able to keep things close and you'll still be able to kill them. Each time an enemy is hit with Scourge, you gain 1% increased damage versus crowd control enemies, and that is up to 50% multiplicative. It's really, really big. Super important part about this is that casting Scourge grants 60% of your maximum vigor over 6 seconds. We are going to be needing to generate vigor incredibly fast, but when we get to the gear, I'll show you exactly why. We're going to do 1 point into Resilient, then we're going to go 3 points into Dominate. What this does, your Guerrilla skills deal 15% increased damage to knock down enemies. And what's really fun is that the first hit has a 5% chance to execute non-bosses. Even elites, you can walk up to an elite, touch it, and then they are immediately executed. We're going to go 3 points into Vehemence. Your potency skills are going to be increased by 30%, but they're going to have a 15% increased cooldown. Now, we are going to be running Touch of Death. This is your potency skill. If you look at the top, you're going to see that the potency skill is also a basic skill and a core skill, and a centipede skill and a jaguar skill and a gorilla skill. This is an ability. We'll explain all of that as the video goes on, so don't worry. It looks like a lot, but we're going to make sure that you understand all of it. We're going to go all the way down through Poised Touch of Death. Touch of Death is now a core skill. That's the first part of it. It's going to cost 70 Vigor and has no cooldown. So we don't need to worry about the 15% increase cooldown here. This ability, the way that it works, when you strike an enemy, you're going to deal damage, applying poison damage over 9 seconds. When the infection expires or the host dies, a swarm hatches that seeks out enemies for 21 seconds, dealing additional damage per hit. You can have up to 3 swarms active at one time. This isn't even where the damage comes from. When we get into the aspect portion of it, that's where all of the real damage comes into play. We're going to go 3 points into Ravenous. Your centipede skills deal 7.5% increased damage, but that's doubled if enemies are healthy. Healthy enemies are anything above 80% life. We're going to do 3 points into Oppressive. Your centipede skills deal 12% increased damage to crowd control enemies, and we're going to gain 30% increased crowd control duration. We're going to do 3 points into Potent. Each enemy hit with Jaguar skills increases your damage they take from you by up to 30%. We're going to do 3 points into Furnace. Your Jaguar skills are going to deal 1.5% increased critical strike damage per stack of Ferocity. Now remember, we get a minimum of 2 here, but we're going to extend that by a little bit when we get into our ultimate skill, which is going to be the Hunter. We're going to go all the way down through Exalted Hunter. What this is going to do for us is you're going to bound across with the Jaguar. That's every time we activate it and you see the Jaguar and we leap forward. That's the ability that we did. The Hunter overfills your Ferocity by 4 stacks, causing you to deal 100% increased damage to injured enemies. Injured enemies is going to be anything that is below 35% life. So we're going to get 4 stacks of Ferocity, which is also going to play into this because we get 1.5% increased damage per stack. So to buff our ultimate, we're going to take 3 points into Resolution. Casting an ultimate skill grants 15% increased damage to elites for 3 seconds. You're going to double that bonus if you're fighting just one enemy, so a boss or an elite. We're going to do 3 points into Spiritual Attunement. With this build, we need to stack as much maximum vigor as we can because that is going to turn into additional damage. We're going to do 3 points into Supremacy. Any enemy you kill while your ultimate skill is active grants you a stack of Supremacy, each increasing your damage by up to 30%. When the ultimate skill ends, you're going to gain 5 stacks of Supremacy. You begin to lose 1 stack per second. To tie this whole thing together, we're going to be taking Prodigy's Tempo as our key passive. Every 3rd consecutive cast of the same basic skill. Now it says basic skill, but we took a potency skill. But this is also a basic skill, and it's also a core skill. So we're going to be able to take advantage of this here. So when we cast Touch of Death 3 times, the basic skill is going to increase all purchase skill ranks by 2. So we're going to gain 2 ranks to everything after a 3rd cast. Now additionally, every 3rd consecutive cast of the same core skill or potency skill reduces all the skill's active cooldowns by 10%, increased by 2% for each of their ranks. We're getting 2 extra ranks, which means that we're going to be getting 14% increased cooldown every single time that we cast Touch of Death 3 times. This build is incredibly complex with all of the interactions. It makes it so much fun to build these classes. So I'm going to go over the Paragon board now so you guys can see how this works. Now remember, this is still in progress. So we're not done yet. We're still grinding Paragon. I haven't even come close to finishing up this characters, even for the gear. So I'm going to have my planner in the description of this video, so make sure you follow along there. I will build out a board with just 200 skills, and then we'll have an additional one with 300 skills. When you first get to 60, make sure you follow along the path of the 200 board, because that will unlock all of your glyphs, and then we're going to put additional points in with all of the extra points that we're going to be getting. So follow along that one first, and then swap to the 300 Paragon point board. For your starter board, we're going to be running Bane. The way that glyphs work is that when you get to level 46 with your glyph, you're going to be gaining an additional legendary bonus. Your glyph now becomes a legendary glyph. That bonus is going to be in the orange on the bottom. With Bane, poisoning damage effects have a 15% chance to deal double the amount of damage over their duration. So if your poison was going to deal 2 damage for 2 seconds, it has a chance to deal 4 damage for 2 seconds. It's also going to give us a 7.3% increased multiplicative number from our legendary glyph. All of the legendary bonuses on the glyphs are all multiplicative damage, and they level up as you rank up your glyphs. The next board, we're going to be running Revealing. You have a 30% chance to knock down vulnerable enemies. You deal 30% increased damage to crowd control enemies. And why would we want to take that? If you remember in the skill tree here, we ended up taking Dominate. What this does is that your guerrilla skills deal 15% increased damage to knock down enemies. So now we're pulling this whole thing together. We now have gotten your knockdown enemies here from the vulnerable enemies from revealing, and now we're doing that additional 15% increased multiplicative damage. Inside of this board, we're going to be running Consumption. You deal 2% increased damage per active swarm of Touch of Death, and you get additional multiplicative damage from your poison. In the next board, we're going to be running Sapping. When you cast 3 Gorilla, Jaguar, Eagle, or Centipede skills with the same spirit in a row, you're going to restore 15% of your vigor, and then you're going to deal 30% multiplicative increased damage. In this board, we're going to be running Fester. Your Centipede skills deal 15% increased damage to crowd control enemies, and your legendary bonus is increased multiplicative poison damage. The next board that we're going to be running is going to be Convergence. You deal bonus damage equal to 20% of your 2 highest bonus damage types combined, up to 30% total. So basically what we're going to be doing is we're going to get 30% increased damage here. The way that it reads is that you take your highest 2 damage numbers, so it would be my critical strike damage bonus, and then it would also be my damage with poison. Takes 20% of that, and then it gives that to you as a multiplicative number. Inside of that board, we're going to be running Colossal. We're going to deal 2% increased damage per stack of resolve that you have. This multiplicative damage number is actually uncapped. The only thing that's capped by it is the amount of resolve stacks that you can get. And if you remember, when we cast Armored Hide, it gives us maximum stacks. We will lose some stacks as we get hit, but we're going to be able to cast Armored Hide quite often, so we're going to see this damage number a lot. For the legendary bonus, we're going to be getting increased damage to close enemies. For the final board, because in this season you can only have up to 5 boards, we're going to be running Vicious Shield. You deal 1% increased damage for 3% of your maximum life that you have as barrier. Later on in the video, I will go over exactly how we're going to get all of our barrier, but this is going to be a huge source of damage here. In this board, we're going to be running Spirit. Critical strikes increase the damage an enemy takes from you by up to 15%. You're also going to get an increased damage to elites as a multiplicative number with this. Next, we're going to hop into the gear. This build requires some uniques, and fortunately, they buffed gambling with your ovals. You take your ovals, you go to the Purveyor of Curiosity, you're going to gamble on 3 different things. You want to gamble on quarterstaffs to get your Rod of Kepaleka. You want to gamble on rings to get your Ring of Midnight Sun. And then you want to gamble on helmets to get your Harmony of Ebewaka. Those are very important to this build, so you don't have them yet. Make sure that you're running whatever your build you can, farm your ovals, and then go gamble. Let's start with the helmet. Harmony of Ebewaka. What this does, according to your secondary spirit hall choice, your skills are all additionally Jaguar, Eagle, Gorilla, or Centipede skills. I'll explain what that means when we get into the spirit hall and what a spirit hall is. Your skills deal up to 30% increased damage per spirit type they have. If you look at Touch of Death, we have 3 different spirit types: Centipede, Gorilla, and Jaguar. For the chest piece, we're going to be running Might. This gives us damage reduction. We don't have Ethereal's Might right now. That is an option for you if you do find one. I also run Turbulence here depending on the content I'm running. If you run Turbulence, it makes Soar pull everything in with Vortex, and then you can keep everything close to you so things don't run away when they're feared. I was pushing the pits, so I wanted some more damage reduction, so that was what I went with here. For the affixes, we're running Dexterity, Maximum Life, and Armor. The armor is actually incredibly important, and we'll get to that next. For the tempers, we're going to be running Touch of Death Swarm Duration. We want to extend the duration of Touch of Death by as absolutely much as we possibly can. We're going to be running Maximum Resolve Stacks. This is where we get that additional stacks that do additional damage and also additional damage reduction. For the gloves, we're going to be running Moonrise. Now remember, your Touch of Death is a basic skill. So what Moonrise does is damaging an enemy with a basic skill. You have a 4% increased attack speed for 10 seconds, and that stacks 5 times. When you reach 5 stacks, you go into a Vampiric Blood Rage, which is kind of fun, and you deal 80% increased basic damage. This can go up to 100%, and you're also going to get 15% movement speed. For the affixes here, we're going to be running Armor, Attack Speed, Critical Strike Damage. For the tempers, we're going to be running Critical Strike Damage, and then Touch of Death Swarm Duration. We want to try and increase this as much as we can. For the pants, we're going to be running Disobedience. we're going to be stacking more and more and more armor. For the affixes, we're going to be running dexterity, max life, and armor again. And then for the tempers, touch of death, swarm. And these are bricks, but what you want to be running is maximum stacks of resolve here. If you follow along in the planner, I'll have all of the actual stats that you want. Make sure you have that planner open. For the boots, you can change this up depending on where your characters are at. I'm only running these because I needed the resistances in tier 4. That 70% that I got is incredibly important because your resistances get dropped by a ton. If you see that, I have 77% here and I'm not even capped. So this is a really, really important piece for me and my character. If you have something different and your character has resistance capped, you can swap these out for something else and add an aspect. For the weapon, the Rod of Kepaleka. This is the most sought after weapon for a Spiritborn right now. Your core skills are now additionally basic skills. So that's where we get this basic core and potency skill from. And they also cost 0 now. So we took the 70 vigor cost from the skill tree and we've now negated that and we've brought it down to 0 because we're using this. However, but you're going to deal up to 30% reduced damage based on the vigor cost. Now that sounds bad, but just wait, it gets better. When cast at maximum vigor, your core skills consume all vigor to return to full damage, cast at their largest size, and become guaranteed critical strikes, with up to 3% increased multiplicative critical strike damage, and that is per point of vigor spent. That's why we wanted to stack as much vigor as we possibly can. The more vigor we have, the more multiplicative number this does. That is a lot to take in. So basically what this does, when you get to maximum vigor, you're going to guarantee a critical strike for your next core skill, which is going to be your Touch of Death. It's going to consume all of the vigor. It's going to make it guaranteed a critical strike, going to add a multiplicative increased critical strike damage bonus for each point of maximum vigor that you have. Now that sounds bad. Now why are we going to want to be spending all of our vigor? Well, we'll cover that later and how you're going to get it back, but you're never going to run out of vigor and you're going to have it basically at full almost all the time. For the ring, we're going to be running unyielding hits. This is the reason we are stacking armor all over the place. Casting a gorilla skill increases your weapon damage by 30% of your armor for 3 seconds. Maximum 1500 bonus weapon damage. Now, this is absolutely insane because we are increasing the base weapon damage. That is where all of your damage multipliers come from. That is a huge bonus. If you look here, the weapon damage only goes up to 650. We're getting up to 1500 more. So this is a huge generator for damage. So even though your armor cap is only at 1000, we are going to stack and stack and stack and stack as much as you can to make sure that this goes up to the maximum that you want it to be at. For the affixes, we're going to be running dexterity, max life, and critical strike damage. And for the tempers, we're going to be running resource generation and then critical strike damage as well. For the other ring, this is where we get all of our vigor back. We're going to be running the Ring of Midnight Sun. When you critically strike, you regen 50% of the vigor that you've spent in the last 2 seconds. If we spend all of our vigor, we're going to get back 50% of that. We can get our vigor back to full in less than 2 seconds. That means that we can spend it again, and now we have spent 100% of all of our vigor, and we're going to get back all of our vigor basically every single cast. When we get to the gameplay loop section, I'll show you what that looks like. It is really fun to see, so it's a really fun interaction. For the amulet, this is where we are going to get all of the damage from Touch of Death. We're going to be running Insatiable. Kills extend the duration of your active Touch of Death swarms by 0.2 seconds. When a swarm is replaced early, it bursts for up to 450% of the damage that it would have done, not the damage that it's been doing. So that means that if you have extended that duration by up to, let's say, 20 seconds, and it explodes after only 2 seconds, that 20 seconds of damage is what hits right away. It does massive amounts of damage, especially if you can replace that quite often. For the affixes here, we actually don't need the critical strike chance because you saw we have a guaranteed critical strike chance. So you want to run something like max life, maximum resources, and then armor percent. So we do want to have that total armor percent on there. That is important. The tempers, we're going to be running Touch of Death swarm duration and then maximum stacks of resolve. That is the gear, that's the build. Let me show you the gameplay loop and the rotation that you do, or the lack of rotation. Because really, when it comes down to it, there is absolutely no rotation. And what I mean by that is that your cooldowns are going to come up so fast that all you have to do is spam every button that comes up. So I'm going to start by using Touch of Death, and then we're going to start the spam. If you watch the cooldowns here, well, they're going to come up all the time, and I'll go over each one of the buffs and what they look like. So we're going to start with Touch of Death. If we're just casting Touch of Death here, this is our stacks of ferocity, so we get 5% increased attack speed per stack. This is your resolve. We're getting damage reduction is 20%. We're also gaining additional damage reduction from our stats. Direct damage consumes a stack, so no matter what, we're going to have that 20% as long as we have any stacks up. This is going to be your increased damage per your swarm, so we have 3 swarms out right now, so it shows you can know exactly how many swarms you have. This is your Moonrise buff, so you know that you have increased movement speed and basic attack damage. So now let's get into the fun of it. We're going to start casting our abilities. So I remember I told you that your Scourge is going to give you increased multiplicative damage. And you see that number going up right there? We're now at 50% increased multiplicative damage. That's huge. So as you start going and then you just start attacking, you want to just cast everything. If you just watch the cooldowns on the very bottom, they're going to come up so fast. Yeah, we really don't have much time to worry about anything at all. And this hits hard. There was 10 billion damage right there. So you just run through, you make sure you keep all of your stacks up, and then you just spam. As you're going through, what we're going to be doing, we'll cover the runes later on, you're going to be pulling things in together with you. So as you pull things together, whenever they get feared, they're going to come back to you. We have vulnerable damage up constantly. So it is a really, really fun, really fast-paced, really hard-hitting build. Your poor hands, they are not going to be happy. Let's talk about the gems and then your spirit hall, because that's really, really important too here. As you can see, I'm running 1 diamond and then I'm running skulls. The skulls are for the armor. I'm not quite capped on my resistances, but if you look through the Paragon board, I have things that will give me resistances as I go on. So as I've gotten deeper and deeper in, I was able to take out more and more diamonds. So based on your character's stats and where you're at, you can kind of juggle these around to make sure you are close to resistance capped. For the weapon, we're going to be running critical strike gems. So this way we're going to get additional critical strike damage. I'm going to be running emeralds in the armor anywhere you can for the runes. And for anybody that was watching, if you saw, it looked like we were running a druid because we had some bulwark up. We're going to be running Pock Q. For this one, you need to spend 300% of your maximum resource and then you cast bulwark. Bulwark is going to give us a barrier. Barrier is going to give us more damage reduction and more damage. For the other runes, we're going to be running Yell Cry. Casting a skill with a cooldown is going to give us a vortex. That's what pulls everything in. You need to cast 6 skills in order to do that. The Spirit Hall. This is where the Helmet of Harmony comes into play. We have selected Gorilla as our main, and then Jaguar as our secondary. What the main one does is that all of our skills are now Jaguar skills. And then the secondary one gives us maximum stacks of ferocity as 1. You're going to gain 1 stack of ferocity whenever you kill an enemy or you damage a boss. Great addition there for the bosses because we can't kill enemies when there's bosses around. So this is going to be big. Casting a gorilla skill is going to grant barrier for 5% of our maximum life up to 30%. We are going to be stacking barrier all over the place. With the Helmet of Harmony, the first part there, according to your secondary spirit hall choice, that is what is making all of Touch of Death be a Centipede, a Jaguar, and a Gorilla skill, and it's going to give us up to 90% increased multiplicative damage. So the Spirit Hall ties everything together. It is a crazy, crazy build. That's all of it. Let me know what you think of it in the comments. It is a ton of fun. If Centipede is for you and you love the poison damage, try this build out. I'm live every single night. Stop by Theorycraft with me. Let me know what you're running. Hopefully, I'll see you there. Catch you on the clip side.